The boxes felt like tombstones, each one sealed with brown tape and scrawled with a black marker. Kitchen, linens, Leo's toys, was a monument to a life packed up and left behind. Sarah stood in the cavernous, empty living room, the echo of her own breath the only sound. Sunlight, thick with dancing dust, streamed through the large bay window, painting a perfect, hopeful square on the hardwood floor. Across the quiet, tree-lined street, a small park basked in the afternoon glow. It was idyllic. Perfect, a fresh start. So why did a knot of ice tighten in her stomach every time she looked at it? "Think the sofa will fit against that wall?" Mark's voice boomed from the doorway, shattering the silence. He grunted as he and a mover wrestled the heavy floral-patterned couch through the front door. It was her grandmother's, a relic she'd insisted on keeping. It felt out of place here, a piece of the past trespassing on their new future. "I think so," she said, her voice sounding small, "in the vast room, as long as it doesn't block the window." Her son Leo, an 8-year-old with his father's dark hair and her own pensive eyes, slipped past the grunting men. He didn't seem to notice the chaos of their new life being unpacked. His gaze was fixed on the scene outside the window. He was a quiet boy, one who lived more in the vast landscapes of his mind than in the world outside. His imagination was a fortress, one they'd always encouraged. "Mummy." Leo's voice was soft. He pressed his small hands against the cool glass. "Can I go to the park?" Sarah followed his gaze. The park was quaint, almost aggressively charming. A set of swings, a slide, and in the center, a solitary, old-fashioned merry-go-round. It was made of faded red metal, the kind that probably groaned when it moved and got too hot in the sun. It seemed lonely. "Let's get your room set up first, sweetie," Sarah said, the reflexive answer of a cautious mother. "Just for a little bit?" he pleaded, turning to face her. His eyes were wide, a universe of yearning in them. "Please?" Mark wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of dust. "Go on, Sarah. Let him go. We can see him from the window. It'll keep him out from under our feet while we get this sorted." She hesitated. It was just a park, a perfectly normal park, in a perfectly normal, sleepy town. Her anxiety was just a ghost from the city they'd left behind, a place of sirens and unseen dangers. This was different. This was safe. "Okay," she relented, a smile finally reaching her face. "But you stay where I can see you. Don't talk to strangers." "I won't," Leo promised, his face lighting up. He was already pulling on his sneakers, a blur of excited energy. He bolted out the door, a flash of blue and denim as he carefully looked both ways before crossing the street. Sarah watched from the window, a sentinel at her post. She saw him run onto the grass, his destination clear. He made a beeline for the merry-go-round, his small hands gripping the metal bars. He tried to push it, his little body straining. It moved with a low, mournful groan, turning just a few inches before settling back into stillness. He climbed on, sitting cross-legged on the faded red floor. He waved back at the house, a wide, happy grin on his face. Sarah waved back, her heart swelling with a mix of love and that persistent, nagging unease. She turned from the window, for just a moment to direct the movers with a box of fragile lamps. When she turned back seconds later, Leo wasn't looking at the house anymore. His back was to her. He was facing the empty spot on the merry-go-round opposite him, and his head was nodding, his lips moving. He was talking, animated and engaged, to someone who wasn't there. The first week was a whirlwind of cardboard and bubble wrap. Sarah and Mark worked from dawn until exhaustion, transforming the empty house into a home. They painted walls, assembled furniture, and learned the unique groans of the old house. Through it all, Leo's life fell into a simple pattern. He'd help his parents in short, restless bursts, then find himself drawn back to the park across the street. The merry-go-round had become his domain. At dinner on the third night, surrounded by towers of unpacked boxes, Leo made an announcement. "I made a friend," he said, poking at his mashed potatoes. "Oh yeah?" Mark asked, taking a large bite of chicken. "At the park? What's his name?" "His name is Thomas," Leo said, his voice matter-of-fact. "He likes the merry-go-round too. He says it's the best ride because it feels like you're standing still while the whole world spins around you." Sarah paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. It was a strangely poetic thought for an 8-year-old. She exchanged a look with Mark, a silent, affectionate smile passing between them. An imaginary friend. It was normal, healthy even, for a boy just uprooted from everything he knew. "Well, that's wonderful, sweetie," Sarah said warmly. "Is Thomas in your class at school?" School hadn't started yet, a soft probe for reality. Leo shook his head, not looking up. "No, he doesn't go to school, he just plays at the park." "Well, maybe you can invite him over to play here sometime," Mark suggested. Leo finally looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "He can't. He's not allowed to leave the park. He has to stay with the merry-go-round." The finality in his tone was strange, but they let it go. It was just the logic of a child's game, the self-imposed rules of an imaginary world. Over the next few days, Thomas became a regular topic of conversation. Thomas thought their yellow car was the color of a dandelion. Thomas didn't like pizza because the cheese was too stringy. Thomas thought their house was much bigger than his. The observations were innocent, childlike, but they were constant. One afternoon, Sarah was in the kitchen wiping down the new countertops. She glanced out the window, as she so often did, to check on Leo. He was at the park, standing beside the merry-go-round, not touching it. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, but it wasn't a strong wind. And yet, the merry-go-round was moving. It turned in a slow, steady, deliberate circle, its rusty axle groaning a rhythmic complaint. Sarah's hands stilled. Leo was just watching it, his head tilted as if listening. She blinked hard. When her eyes refocused, the merry-go-round was motionless. The wind had died down. Had she imagined it? A trick of the light, the heat shimmering off the pavement, a mind tired from unpacking. It had to be. That night, as Mark was tucking Leo into bed after a story about a boy who finds a dragon, the conversation took a turn. "Daddy?" Leo asked, his voice muffled by his pillow. "Are ghosts real?" Mark sat on the edge of the bed. "Nobody. Ghosts are just make-believe. Characters in stories like dragons or wizards. They're just ways people used to explain things they didn't understand." Leo was quiet for a moment. "Oh, good," he said finally, a note of relief in his voice. "Thomas told me he wasn't a ghost. I'm glad he wasn't lying." Mark froze. The casual, reassuring words died in his throat. He looked at his son, whose eyes were already fluttering shut. The sentence hung in the quiet, softly lit room, heavy and cold. It was one thing for a boy to have an imaginary friend. It was another thing entirely for that friend to be discussing his own spectral state. He leaned down, kissed Leo's forehead, and walked out, shutting the door softly. He stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, and for the first time, he felt a genuine, chilling spike of fear. The line between Leo's world and Thomas's began to blur, staining the fabric of their new life. Thomas was no longer just a playmate. He was an oracle, and his knowledge was specific, esoteric, and deeply unsettling. One Saturday morning, as Leo came inside for a glass of water, their elderly neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was meticulously trimming his hedges 2 houses down. "Mr. Henderson is sad today," Leo announced as Sarah filled his cup. "Oh, why do you think that, honey?" she asked, distracted. "Thomas told me," Leo said simply. "He said Mr. Henderson's wife gave him that watch he always wears. Today would have been their anniversary. That's why he's making the bushes look perfect. She always liked perfect bushes." Sarah stopped cold. How could Leo possibly know that? They'd exchanged no more than a dozen words with the man. She watched through the window as Mr. Henderson paused, pulling up his sleeve to look at an old gold watch on his wrist. His shoulders slumped. It was exactly as Leo had described. She felt a wave of dizziness. "Leo," she said, her voice tight. "Did you talk to Mr. Henderson?" "No," Leo said, taking a long sip of water. "Thomas knows everything about everyone here. He's been here a very, very long time." Leo began to change. The bright, imaginative boy grew more insular, more secretive. He'd spend hours in his room not playing with his Legos, but sitting on the floor whispering to the empty air. If they entered, the whispering stopped, and Leo would look at them with a guarded expression, as if they were intruders. His drawings, once vibrant explosions of superheroes, grew dark and monotonous. Page after page showed the same image, a lonely merry-go-round under a brooding, scribbled sky. Sometimes there was one figure on it, sometimes 2, one of them drawn with a faint, wavering line like a smudge. A rainy Tuesday night brought the breaking point. The family was on the couch for a movie when the power flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. "Ah, for Pete's sake," Mark muttered, fumbling for his phone's flashlight. Probably a fuse. As he stood to head to the basement, Leo's small voice cut through the dark. "Don't go down there, Daddy." "It's okay, Leo. I just need to flip a switch." "No," Leo insisted, his voice trembling. "You have to be careful on the stairs. Thomas said the man who lived here before us wasn't careful. He fell right at the bottom. Thomas said he heard his neck make a cracking sound like a twig. The air grew thick. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Mark's flashlight beam froze. He didn't want to validate the fear, but he couldn't help it. He opened the basement door and aimed the beam down the steep wooden steps. He took a deep breath and descended, placing each foot with exaggerated care. He found the fuse box and flipped the breaker. The lights flickered back on. As he turned to go, his light caught a dusty cardboard box tucked under the stairs. On a whim, he pulled it out. Inside, amongst yellowed receipts, was a folded, brittle newspaper clipping dated 12 years prior. The headline read, "Freak Accident Claims Local Homeowner." The article detailed how the former resident had died from a fatal fall down his basement stairs. The cause of death, a cervical fracture, a broken neck. Mark pocketed the clipping. He didn't mention it to Sarah. He told himself there had to be a rational explanation, but the pit in his stomach told him otherwise. The games started soon after, framed as innocent dares laced with a terrifying malice. "Thomas wants to see if I can make my face look like a blueberry," Sarah heard Leo chanting. She pushed his door open to find her son holding his breath, his face a terrifying shade of purple. A few days later, Mark smelled smoke and found Leo in his closet, crouched over a small, blackened patch of carpet, a book of matches in his hand. "Thomas told me matches are like tiny, captured stars," Leo explained, his voice devoid of emotion. He wanted to see one up close. Each time they confronted him, the response was the same tearful defense. "Thomas told me to do it." "You don't understand him. He's my friend." He was defending this thing against his own parents, and it was breaking their hearts. The final escalation came on a Sunday afternoon. Sarah was in the kitchen, the oven preheating to a hellish orange. The landline rang, a telemarketer. She was on the phone for no more than 90 seconds. But in that brief window, her world tilted on its axis. She heard a chair scrape against the tile floor. "Leo?" she called out, hanging up. Silence. She rushed back into the kitchen, and her breath hitched in a gasp of pure terror. Leo was standing on a chair he'd dragged to the stove. The oven door was open. He was leaning forward, his small hand outstretched, reaching for the glowing orange heating elements inside. His face was a mask of serene concentration. "I want to touch the sun," he whispered, his voice distant. "Thomas said it's what it feels like holding a little piece of the sun right in your hand." Paralyzed for a split second by a horror so profound it felt like a physical blow, Sarah finally lunged, adrenaline surging through her. She grabbed Leo around the waist, yanking him backward off the chair just as he lunged. He tumbled into her arms, and she fell back against the cabinets, clutching him to her chest. "Leo, no, what were you thinking?" she screamed, her voice raw with fear and fury. The spell was broken. Leo began to sob, great, heaving, body-racking sobs. The confrontation that followed was a storm of tears and terror. Leo shrieked that they were mean, that they hated his only friend. Sarah and Mark, their faces pale with shock, realized with sickening certainty that this was no longer a phase. This was something dangerous, something with its hooks in their son. That night, for the first time, they locked Leo's bedroom door from the outside. They sat in the dark living room, the silence of the house a living thing, and they knew they were losing a war against an enemy they couldn't even see. The silence after the storm was worse than the shouting. Leo was finally asleep, his tear-streaked face impossibly small. Sarah and Mark sat at the kitchen table, an untouched casserole cold on the counter. The oven incident had been a precipice. "We can't do this anymore," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. "We can't pretend this is normal." Mark, the pillar of rational explanations, finally crumbled. He could have. Sarah. He couldn't finish the sentence. The image of Leo reaching into that furnace was seared into both their minds. "That story," she said, her voice barely audible, "about the man in the basement. You found a newspaper clipping." Mark nodded slowly, slid the folded, brittle paper across the table. Sarah read it, her hand trembling. "How?" she breathed. "How could he know these things, Mark? The neighbor's wife, the man in the basement. How?" "Thomas," Mark said, the name tasting like poison. "Thomas knows." Fear hardened into resolve. With Leo safely asleep, they opened the laptop. Their search was a frantic plunge into the digital history of their quiet town. They started with the house, then the neighborhood, confirming online obituaries for Mr. Henderson's wife. Still nothing. Connected it all. "The park," Sarah said, her voice strained. "It all started at the merry-go-round." Mark's fingers flew across the keyboard. Park history. Town name. Accidents at town name Community Park. Deaths at town name Park. The search terms grew more morbid. For hours they sifted through town council minutes and community blogs. Nothing. "Wait," Mark said, leaning closer to the screen. He was in the town's online library archive, a clunky site with scanned microfiche, records of the old local paper. Let's just go way back. He worked his way backward. The 90s, the 80s, the 70s. The screen was a blur of grainy black and white. Just as Sarah was about to suggest they give up, Mark's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. "Sarah, look." He had stopped on an issue from August 1958. There, on page 3, a small article. The headline was simple, stark, and utterly devastating. "Local boy dies in tragic park accident." They read about a 9-year-old boy named Thomas Miller who loved the community park. One hot summer afternoon, his foot became trapped in the mechanism beneath the merry-go-round. According to the horrified accounts of other children, he was dragged and thrown, his small body broken by the merciless force of the spinning metal. And next to the text was a grainy black and white school photograph of a boy with dark hair and a bright, hopeful smile. It was the faint, smudged figure from Leo's drawings. A floorboard creaked upstairs. They looked at each other, a new terror eclipsing the one on the screen. They sprinted up the stairs. The lock on Leo's door was still in place, but the door was ajar. They pushed it open. The room was empty. The window was wide open, curtains fluttering in the night breeze. They ran, a shared primal scream of a thought propelling them. Out the front door and across the street, their bare feet slapping against the cold asphalt. The park was bathed in the eerie, orange glow of the streetlights. It was silent except for one sound, a rhythmic, high-pitched metallic shriek. The merry-go-round was spinning faster than any child could push it, a terrifying vortex of faded red metal. On it, clinging desperately to the bars, was Leo. His eyes were wide and blank. He wasn't crying. He was just holding on. And he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, pushing the ride with an effortless, supernatural grace, was another boy. He was translucent, shimmering like heat haze, his form composed of moonlight and memory. It was the boy from the photograph. It was Thomas. The ghost leaned close to Leo's ear, his whisper carrying over the screeching metal. "Faster, Leo. This is the best part. You have to fly, just like I did. Let go, Leo. Let go and you can fly with me forever." "Leo!" Sarah's shriek tore through the night, a raw sound of maternal anguish. Mark ran toward the spinning blur. He tried to grab the rail, and searing pain shot up his arms as his skin met the friction-heated metal. He recoiled, crying out. The apparition of Thomas turned its head. The cheerful features from the photo twisted into something ancient and filled with a bottomless rage. "He's mine!" it shrieked, its voice a chorus of wind and scraping metal. "He's my friend now, you can't have him!" Ignoring the pain, Mark lunged again. He saw a thick, fallen tree branch, grabbed it, and with a guttural roar, jammed it deep into the undercarriage. There was a horrific splintering crack, a groan of tortured metal, and the merry-go-round shuddered to a violent halt. The sudden stop threw Leo from the platform. He landed with a soft thud on the damp grass. Mark and Sarah scrambled to his side. He was conscious, dazed but alive, whole. Sarah pulled him into her arms, her body racked with shuddering sobs of relief. Mark stood guard, his burned hands throbbing, eyes scanning the park. The merry-go-round was still, and it was empty. The ghost of Thomas Miller was gone. They stumbled back to the house, a traumatized huddle of a family. They would move. They would sell the house at a loss, go somewhere new, somewhere without a park, without a history. They thought it was over. Dawn broke, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and grey. Sarah, aching with exhaustion, knew she couldn't let Leo sleep on the floor. Cradling him, she carried his limp, warm body up to his bedroom. The room felt cold, violated. She tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and felt a wave of profound, desperate love. He was safe. That was all that mattered. She turned to leave, pulling the door quietly until it was almost closed. She stood in the hallway, forehead pressed against the cool wood, and took her first real breath of relief. A faint sound from inside the room made her pause, a soft sigh that was not Leo's. She held her breath, listening. Her heart began to pound. Slowly she leaned forward and peered through the crack in the door, and she saw him. Standing by the side of Leo's bed, looking down at her sleeping son, was the faint, shimmering outline of Thomas Miller. He wasn't pushing or shouting. He was just watching, a look of calm, patient ownership on his translucent face. As if sensing her, his head turned slowly. His eyes, two dark, empty pools, locked with hers through the narrow gap. The air in the hallway turned to ice. He raised a single, shimmering finger to his lips in a universal gesture. Shh. And then, with a slowness that was the most terrifying thing she had ever witnessed, his lips curled into a wide, triumphant, knowing smile. The door clicked shut,